In the year 1604, a young man, barely 20 years old, walked into a duel against the most respected samurai school in Japan. He had no armor, no status, no noble lineage, just a wooden sword and an unconventional mind. This man was Miyamoto Musashi. He walked away from the battlefield with the ground painted in the blood of some of the most elite warriors in Japan. He conquered, yet he remained unsatisfied. Musashi didn't fight for victory. He fought for something much greater. He fought for what he would later call the Way. Musashi is remembered as the greatest swordsman to ever live. He won over 60 duels, many ending in death, but the strength of his legacy is not built from his violence, but the philosophy he developed along the way. Musashi built his philosophy on a fundamental truth. He said, "If you know the way broadly enough, you see it in all things." To Musashi, the way was not something only to be seen in sword fighting, but a principle that applies to all things: war, art, life itself. He believed that mastery was a process that could be translated between disciplines. A swordsman can learn from a painter, a strategist from a carpenter, and a warrior from the flow of water. This is because the way is everywhere. It can be seen in the way a blacksmith hammers steel, in the patience of a fisherman waiting for his catch, in the fluidity of a poet finding his words. This trans-discipline pattern explains why those hyper-successful in one field are often finding great success in other fields. Musashi embodied his philosophy. He wasn't just a swordsman, he was an artist, a calligrapher, a writer. He understood that every craft and skill was connected by the same underlying principles: discipline, awareness, and adaptability. Musashi's life can be seen as contradictory. He was brutal in battle, yet deeply philosophical. He mastered violence and then spent his final years writing about peace. His defining work, The Book of the Five Rings, was not just a manual on sword fighting, it was a guide to mastering life. One of his most powerful ideals was, do not have a narrow mind. To Musashi, this meant not hyperfixating on a single skill or way of life. He understood that mastery does not come from the neglect of all but one skill, but instead comes from understanding everything. Today, our world tells us to specialize, to pick one thing and to stick with it. But Musashi realized that mastery comes from expansion. You must discover patterns across disciplines and not settle in a single way of thinking. You must think like a warrior, not just act like one. One of Musashi's most famous lines was, "Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world." This meant detaching from your ego. Don't assume you know everything and that the world will bend to your perspective. In his most famous duel, Musashi was set to face Sasaki Kojiro, who was renowned for his speed and precision. Instead of just playing into his strengths, Musashi arrived late and he fought him with a long sword that was carved from a boat oar. This threw Sasaki off, and Musashi beat him with only one strike. This reminds us the world is unpredictable. Relying on rigid rules leads to defeat, but by training for adaptation and thinking deeply of the world, you will always be ready. Now, near the end of his life, Musashi summarized his wisdom in 21 principles, his dokuro, or the way of walking alone. It was a philosophy of detachment, discipline, and focus on what really matters. One of the most powerful principles: do not regret what you have done. To Musashi, regret was a trap. If you made a mistake, learn. If you lose, adapt. If you win, move forward. Action and not overthinking was the path to mastery. This philosophy reminds us, keep moving forward. All that you can control is your next move, so don't get hung up on the past. Life, to Musashi, is not a duel, but it's a long, winding battle, and only by walking and learning will you master it. Musashi lived and died by his philosophy, and though we no longer live and die by swords, his philosophy remains. Thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And as always, I'm Nathaniel Dillon. Thanks for daring to know, and I'll see you next time.